had tears in their eyes, and because they lost loved ones, and their brothers are missing, or and it's a sad moment to be with them. And the least I can do is to give them a hug and maybe encourage them some. We're gathering all the possible evidence. At the appropriate time, we will let America know what the evidence says.
Do you feel like you know who did it?
We know we got a suspect.
Thank you all.
You just saw there and just heard there the President of the United States, George W. Bush, talking about his impressions as he visited Ground Zero, that site you can see now live on your screen at just 2 to 3 in the morning in New York, as the rescue workers continue their mission to find any survivors amid the rubble of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. But of course that rescue mission now very much turning into a recovery mission, and we'll be following developments in New York, of course, as they come to us here at Sky. But for the moment, it's been reported this morning on Sky News that the Afghan Islamic press are saying now that Afghanistan's ruling Taliban has said they may attack any neighbour which gives assistance to the US and strikes on their country. Well, joining us for analysis on that now is Sky's defence expert Francis Tusa. Francis, Pakistan, of course, springs to mind here. They have agreed to close their land borders. They have agreed to cut off fuel supplies. They are allowing use of limited military airspace. This would seem to be, from the Taliban, Afghanistan's ruling militia and administration there, a veiled threat to its neighbour.
Not veiled. It's pretty open, saying anyone helping United States and anyone else with them, and that's it, we will respond. Get the impression that this is partly because the United States isn't doing anything. You heard the quote there from President Bush where he's saying, we're gathering the evidence. As and when we have all the evidence in place, we will let you know. I think most people expected in the aftermath of the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon that within 15 hours there would have been cruise missiles being launched all over the world, airstrikes, and there are a lot of people saying that the United States shouldn't lash out. Well, the United States hasn't lashed out. Here we are 5 days later. There's not been single military action. They're saying they are going to, it's almost as if this is a civil crime where they're saying, well, we're going to wait till we've got all the evidence, and then we will go to court, we will put all the evidence in front of the jury, and then once we get a conviction, we will do something about it. They are pacing this one very carefully, if only to make sure that the international alliance that was created in the immediate aftermath of the bombings stays together. I know there are stories of various countries, like the French, saying, we're a bit, dubious about this. I'm sure you will see a lot of work to keep the French on side.
Francis Tusa for the moment, thank you.
Well, at football matches throughout the country, there'll be a minute's silence before every one to remember the disaster in America.
Here in the East. Let's take a look, if we can, at some of the headlines that are in the papers for this morning. From the Washington Post, it says, District Nation moved to high alert. Washington and the nation moved the defense of the homeland yesterday to a level not seen since the raid on Pearl Harbor. It goes on to talk about the deep civil and military concern that the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were but the opening salvos in a war unlike any the U.S. has ever faced. Going now, if we can, to the Boston Globe. The headline there, an emotional Bush promises victory, and talking about the fact that President Bush has promised to basically turn his entire presidency, the focus of that, to fighting terrorism, whatever it takes, around the globe, saying, now that war has been declared on us, we will lead the world to victory, to victory. From the New York Times, this headline, an unobtrusive man's odyssey, polite student to suicide hijacker. We're talking here about Mohammed Atta, 33 years old, who is believed to be one of the hijackers aboard the first plane to smash into the World Trade Center, talking about his life, and some man who appeared to be quite unobtrusive and who they believe is one of the leading terrorists in this attack. And then returning to the Chicago Tribune, and the headline from the Chicago Tribune is a day of prayers, tears, and patriotism. And from this you get the sense that in every city in America we have been affected, not just here in New York or in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, but indeed, or in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, but indeed all over the U.S. and all over the world. Chicago, in fact, joining the nation in mourning as the victims of this week's terror attack were remembered in ceremonies great and small. Well, MSNBC and NBC's continuing coverage of the attack on America will be back shortly.
This weekend, CNBC Europe brings you live and uninterrupted coverage from MSNBC of the news and developments following the attack on America. Then from 2200 CET Sunday, a special program, Market Reopening Information Center, live from CNBC US, designed to distribute all the necessary information for an orderly return to business for the US equity markets. This weekend on CNBC.
Yesterday on a material witness warrant. Sources say the man is the same person detained at JFK Airport on Thursday after showing authorities a pilot's license issued to his brother. The FBI also detained 2 possible suspects in Texas and then flew them to New York for questioning. The men were flying from Newark to San Antonio on the morning of the attacks, but they were diverted to St. Louis. The men reportedly were carrying box-cutting knives and large amounts of cash. Congress has okayed the use of force against those responsible for the terror attacks, the countries that harbor them, and their sponsors and protectors. Lawmakers also approved $40 billion in emergency funding. President Bush also declared a national emergency on Friday, clearing the way for 50,000 reservists to be called to active duty. Meantime, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban militia are threatening to attack any nation that participates in retaliatory strikes. They're calling on Muslims around the world to prepare for a jihad or a holy war. And authorities are analyzing both black boxes from the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania and the plane that crashed at the Pentagon. The search continues for the black boxes from the planes that slammed into the World Trade Center. And now we go to Ground Zero in New York City and the search there through the World Trade Center rubble. NBC's Jeannie Ohm joins us live from the site. And as it has been going on since this all occurred, they're not stopping, are they, Jeannie?
Absolutely not, Sarah. You know, 4 days after 2 planes slammed into the Twin Towers and brought them down, more than 4,700 people are still unaccounted for. And even though they have not found any additional survivors in 2 days, the search continues at this hour. The difference right now, though, is there are less volunteers on the front lines at Ground Zero, what used to be the World Trade Center. But we're told that's not because the people have given up hope. What it really is a reflection of is they're a lot more better organized. It's a much more coordinated effort. And they said with all those people there, they were tending to get into the way of each other, so they've really streamlined efforts. Something else they're using right now is a high-tech digital radio frequency device, and what that's doing is they're helping to seek out if there are any signals coming out from pagers, cell phones, anything to help lead them to survivors. Now, earlier tonight, Mayor Giuliani said that they are still not giving up hope. This is still a search and rescue mission, but he said he wants families to be prepared to face reality that in case there are no additional survivors pulled from the rubble, and he, together with the medical examiner's office, they've come up with a list of things they want the families to bring to the center, to the armory, and that includes a toothbrush, a hairbrush from their loved ones, razor, possibly cigarette butts, unwashed undergarments, used utensils, even used chewing gum, anything, because at this point, he says, unfortunately, they may have to rely on DNA to make the identification. So again, at this point, there are still more than 4,700 people unaccounted for, but the searching continues. Sarah?
All right, Jeannie Ohm joining us from Ground Zero. Thank you so much, Jeannie. Well, just as September 11th is going to go down in American history as perhaps the most tragic day on American soil, yesterday may also go down as one of the most uplifting. And that may seem hard to believe, but indeed it was an uplifting day when the president and other leaders from around the country went to Washington, D.C. They went to the Washington National Cathedral. This was a situation of an interfaith service Statesmen poured in from around the country. They wanted to give hope to the families of the victims. Let's take a look now, if we can, at that service in its entirety. Let's listen in on that soaring ceremony.
Americans across the country have taken time out to pray. This is a national tragedy. This is more than local tragedies in two American cities. The nation cries today. The nation's heart bleeds. American flags hang in small towns and big cities and suburbs. Signs of unity of a nation that has been bruised and battered, but is coming together in this time of unbelievable sorrow. More people taken from us perhaps than Pearl Harbor, the Titanic, and other famous tragedies combined, but we frankly don't know. We continue to watch the line of dignitaries making their way. I believe that was Trent Lott. As we continue to watch these images, I'm joined by Monsignor Tom McSweeney and Rabbi Simon Jacobson to talk about this day of remembrance. Gentlemen, good morning to both of you. Rabbi Jacobson, are you with us?
I'm with you. Good morning, I said.
Let me ask you about the conflicting feelings that this country is going through. We are sad, we are weeping, but there is also this anger and all these conflicting emotions. Can you talk about that?
Indeed, it's been said, this is Monsignor McSweeney speaking, that anger is love disappointed. You know, we are angry, we are very conflicted. But as we watch what's happening here right now at the National Cathedral, we're focusing on the importance of the individual, that each and every human life, your life, my life, is beyond all price. And that is what we draw our strength from, not from the anger. We draw our strength from the truth that God knows each and every one of us by our name. He knows us by our heart. God did not will this evil, but he counts on each one of us as individuals to draw strength from our love for one another, to minister to one another as the important, priceless individuals that we are.
Rabbi Jacobson, we are a country that believes we have such a strong moral fiber, a country that we believe stands for justice, and we simply can't rationalize this anger, this hatred that has been aimed toward our country. How do we begin to rationalize that?
Maybe we shouldn't rationalize it. You know, it's a tribute to our nation that we cannot face such evil in the eye, because we are in a way naive and have never encountered such evil. You know, people cannot identify with something.
Because when the jet crashed into those two towers, of course, they were loaded with a lot of fuel. The fire was extremely intense, and many of those bodies were burned completely. More than 13,000 tons of debris has been recovered from the site. They've been mainly taken to Staten Island. There, the FBI is sifting through the debris and trying to get any kind of clues from the debris to find out if perhaps any of those evidence of who the hijackers may be. We have a list of names, but perhaps in that debris, the FBI can find some more clues. Back to you, Garrick.
Yes, Alessio, it's a rather sensitive point, of course. You touched on it, though, and I think we should follow up on it. The rescue workers there, they're not finding survivors. They don't really believe they're going to find survivors, but still city officials aren't saying that all hope is lost. But tell us a bit about the atmosphere and what you're hearing from those workers there. I mean, do they hold out any hope still?
They did not give up on hope, especially because they can hear on television, perhaps, or on the radio every day, that the people up at the armory are still hoping to be able to find their people alive, and therefore the rescue workers here perhaps believe that it is up to them to meet some of those hopes and then see if perhaps somebody in an air pocket or perhaps underneath a large piece of concrete may still be alive. And also, Garrick, it's important to know that underneath that rubble there are still 300 firemen, 30 police officers, 30 Port Authority officers. These are all people who are some of the people who are there knew. There were some friends, some comrades, and therefore perhaps that particular element also is giving the rescue operation here and then another boost in trying to find perhaps one of their comrades still alive. So there is still not only the fact to find people who were working in there, but also some of their comrades who rushed into the building soon after the plane crashed into it before it collapsed.
Thank you very much, Alessio. Certainly a very strong, motivating force to keep on digging, keep on working. Back now to Jim and Colleen in Atlanta.
All right, Gary, thank you for that. Well, moving now from rescue and recovery toward retaliation, something that may also be in the future a sure sign of America's resolve. President Bush authorizing the Defense Department to call up as many as 50,000 military reservists for Homeland Defense. With the latest from the Pentagon, now we're joined by Mark Potter live. Mark?
Well, there are a couple of issues going on here at the Pentagon. There is the reserve call-up, and there is taking care of the Pentagon building itself. About a third of the complex remains closed after being hit by the hijacked jetliner on Thursday. Which ironically had just finished being renovated. And officials estimate it could take it could take several years to rebuild this area, and could cost anywhere between $100 million and $1 billion to do that. Now, as we can see here in this live picture, the workers continue to pour through the building to sift through the rubble. They're still trying to find victims. They're trying to shore up the building so that they can work more safely there. The safety is an extreme consideration here. There are some very dangerous conditions. Occasionally fires break out also. They are also looking for evidence to help the FBI with its criminal case. The estimated death toll now stands at 189. That's 125 Pentagon personnel and about 64 passengers from the American Airlines jet. Now, today the Pentagon is putting together plans for the activation of the reservists that you were talking about, some 35,000 reservists. The military says it will first ask for volunteers, and it already seems that there are a lot of those.
We've had people who are knocking on the doors seeking to help. They want to serve. They want to be a part of this. They're very emotional. We've had to say, wait a little bit. You know, we've only had a matter of hours since this all began. We're proceeding along our way, and now we have the authorization to bring those people on board.
The reservists will be used to help with the disaster relief efforts, and also to support the National Guard pilots who have been seen particularly over the skies of, in the skies over Washington, D.C. and New York, flying the combat air patrols, as we can see here. They are also on standby, a 15-minute standby at a number of bases around the country. This call-up would involve also the Coast Guard reservists, who would be involved in shoring up the defenses along the nation's at the nation's seaports. The call-up will begin in the next few days, and we will see people leaving their families and their civilian jobs. Among those who are likely to be activated, engineers, doctors, military police, air defense, and intelligence specialists, and chaplains. Jim, back to you.
All right, Mark Potter reporting there live from the Pentagon. Well, from coast to coast on Friday, Americans paused. They paused to mourn. The National Day of Prayer and Remembrance inspired candlelight vigils for the victims and their families.
I have come from you, the God of my salvation.
In Providence, Rhode Island, thousands of people went to the State House to hold candles in memory of those who lost their lives. They listened to state leaders speak about the need to unite as a nation.
hymn written in 1875 is known best for its refrain, "Father, in thy gracious keeping, leave we now thy servant sleeping."
The
John,
president, we understand,
let me interrupt, John, just for a moment. We're looking at Representative Gary Condit, and a man whose name was so prominent in the news until Tuesday among the members of Congress who were filing in. We do want to tell you that we reported that the Senate had moved very quickly to approve use of force resolution for the president's signature. It looks as though the House is not going to follow the lead. They will likely take their vote tomorrow. The word we're getting in the House didn't expect the Senate to move quite so quickly, and they're frankly
detained at the railway station overnight in Dallas. They are being flown back by U.S. Marshals to New York, which is, of course, the center of this inquiry, to be questioned there. I don't know what aroused suspicions of the authorities there, other than that they stopped these men on a casual stop, thinking that maybe they had drugs on them. It turns out that what they had was a large amount of cash, several $1,000s. They were also carrying these box-cutting knives, the sort of one-bladed knife that the hijackers are known to have used to take over the aircraft. But they think enough of that for them to be flown back to New York, and what the FBI have said is that they believe these men may be able to help in the inquiry. That is what the FBI is telling us. We take that at face value because they have had some false starts in the last couple of days.
Keith, for the moment, thank you.
International flights are slowly getting back to normal after the closure of American airspace. Here, British Airways are running 20 flights to the United States today. Normally there'd be 36 on a Saturday, but there's still a huge backlog of passengers at all the British airports.
Heathrow Airport is an odd location for us.
Comme des espèces de graines internes, appelées spores.
Former President Clinton has been on all...
calls her husband Ted.
A 0,4% y España está a menos del 0,2%, con lo cual todavía estamos a...
The World Trade Center. Why? I just
taught my house.
Yeah, that's not too far away from where you are, is it?
No, not at all. Probably about an
owned, because Madison Square Garden itself is being used as a temporary shelter.
Un verre par jour.
Workers and anybody else who wants to use it as refuge. So that has been cancelled across the board with all the rest of the American sports this weekend, the NFL, the National Hockey League and the baseball. The National Hockey League, of course, mourning 2 of its scouts.
I don't know where he is. And I know if he made it out of that building, he would have called me up immediately.
Well, it's just hard to know that 15,000 families or more than that are just destroyed for no reason.
This conflict was begun on the timing and terms of others. It will end in a way and at an hour of our choosing.
Colocó en 10,11 euros por título. Mal momento también el que atravesó el sector de nuevas tecnologías con Terralicos a la cabeza, que registró mínimos históricos al dejarse un 23% de su valor. Empezará.
La tarea es aún más complicada porque solo se han encontrado partes. De hecho, el número de miembros esparcidos es innumerable. La lentitud con la que avanzan las operaciones hace prever una búsqueda que se podría alargar durante meses. El rescate podría ser todavía más complicado si se derrumbara lo que queda de 3 edificios menores del complejo. Por contra, diferentes países van haciendo recuento de los desaparecidos. Uno de los más afectados es Alemania, que los eleva a 700. De Centro y Sudamérica podrían proceder 1 millar. De Hong Kong, otros 300.
Los hospitales de Nueva York en primera línea del frente. El cuerpo médico que acudió en masa a prestar sus servicios tras los atentados suicidas contra el World Trade Center siente haber vivido una situación próxima a la guerra. El centro hospitalario de Downtown, a tan solo 5 manzanas de las Torres Gemelas, fue uno de los primeros en empezar a ocuparse de los heridos. Solo casos extremos, explica el Dr. Beaton, de aquellos que morían poco después de ser ingresados, a los que apenas tenían algunas contusiones pero estaban aterrorizados. Como la mayoría de los internos no ha vivido ninguna guerra, sin embargo dijo haberse sentido como en un hospital de campaña.
But I understand this was as close to being a hospital on the front lines of a battlefield as anybody has ever led me to believe.
Un sentimiento de frustración recorre los pasillos. Hay pocos heridos, pocas posibilidades de salvar vidas. Las víctimas del World Trade Center han sido mortales. Para nosotros es desmoralizante, explica el director del Departamento de Urgencias, el Dr. Goldsmith. La mayoría de los heridos que han precisado atención médica eran miembros del cuerpo de bomberos o de los equipos de rescate. Pese a todo, familiares de los desaparecidos siguen recorriendo los hospitales en busca de un milagro. Estados Unidos reabre sus aeropuertos. Lentamente y entre fuertes medidas de seguridad, el tráfico aéreo se ha reanudado en el 80% de los aeropuertos del país. En la tarde de ayer, varias compañías europeas iniciaron los primeros vuelos transatlánticos. Air France, British Airways e Iberia han obtenido la autorización para operar normalmente a partir de hoy. Entre los pasajeros, las reacciones son varias. Francamente, creo que es el momento más seguro para viajar en avión. Además, hay un sentimiento de fraternidad en los aeropuertos que no existía antes, muy agradable. Las nuevas medidas de seguridad incluyen la prohibición de embarcar con un objeto cortante de cualquier longitud de filo, así como la presencia de agentes especialmente entrenados en todos los vuelos. Me gusta la idea de que haya agentes de seguridad armados. Creo que si todo el mundo hubiese llevado un arma en los vuelos, esto no habría ocurrido. Entre los aeropuertos todavía cerrados al tráfico aéreo se encuentra el de Washington por su proximidad a la Casa Blanca y al Congreso, menos de 2 kilómetros. Para los pasajeros, lo importante no es cómo, sino cuándo podrán volver a casa.
Ahora, otras noticias de la actualidad internacional.
El ejército israelí lanza un bombardeo masivo contra la Franja de Gaza. Los bombardeos con helicópteros Apache se produjeron poco después de mediodía sobre 4 localidades. Al menos 10 personas han resultado heridas y varios organismos de seguridad palestinos destruidos. Esta madrugada, tanques israelíes ya habían realizado una incursión militar en un campo de refugiados del sur de Gaza, que se saldó con la muerte de 2 jóvenes palestinos. Horas antes, en la aldea de Bet Hanun, al norte, destruyeron 2 bases de la policía y varias casas e invernaderos de campesinos. Los últimos ataques tienen lugar el mismo día en que el primer ministro israelí, Ariel Sharon, ha prohibido a su titular de Exteriores acudir a un encuentro previsto para mañana con el líder palestino Yasser Arafat. El portavoz de su ejecutivo, Avi Pashner, ha declarado que por el momento no se sabe si habrá encuentro o no. Sharon y Pérez, dijo, se reunirán mañana para adoptar una decisión al respecto. Yasser Arafat se entrevistaba hace apenas una semana con Javier Solana, el responsable de Exteriores de la Unión Europea, para preparar un encuentro destinado a poner fin a la violencia. El líder palestino se ha declarado dispuesto a celebrarlo tal como previsto. Saeb Erekat, uno de sus ministros, declaró que si Sharon anulaba el encuentro es porque tenía una alternativa a la paz que solo podía ser una escalada en las agresiones. Los enfrentamientos entre israelíes y palestinos cumplirán un año a finales de este mes. Y aunque en junio acordaron una tregua, la violencia continúa. 800 personas han muerto. El león de Panjshir ha dejado de rugir en el norte de Afganistán. La muerte del carismático comandante Massoud ha dejado huérfana de líder militar a la oposición al régimen integrista de los talibán. Massoud fue víctima el domingo pasado de un atentado suicida perpetrado por dos hombres que se hicieron pasar por periodistas. Hoy su fallecimiento ha sido confirmado por la embajada afgana en Moscú. Desafortunadamente, esta mañana hemos sabido que Massoud ha muerto como consecuencia de las heridas que sufrió en el ataque terrorista. Héroe de la resistencia afgana, su fama se remonta a las luchas libradas contra la ocupación soviética de Afganistán entre 1979 y 1989. Tras la entrada en Kabul de los talibán en 1996, Massoud se refugió con sus tropas en el valle de Panjshir, en el norte del país, desde donde les plantó batalla. Ahora su muerte amenaza con debilitar a toda la región.
Y ahora toda la actualidad de Internet en EE.UU. El nuevo sitio web de la Casa Blanca incluyó rápidamente los primeros discursos del presidente estadounidense tras los atentados terroristas. Evidentemente, estas páginas no ofrecen noticias sobre las investigaciones en curso. Ni Bush ni su esposa podían saber a finales de agosto, cuando el perfeccionado sitio web fue presentado a la prensa, que un mes después miles de internautas buscarían en sus páginas informaciones sobre tan trágicos acontecimientos y eventuales consecuencias. El sitio contiene discursos presidenciales, biografías del presidente, la primera dama y parte de sus colaboradores. Incluye una sección escrita en español, fotografías del interior de la residencia presidencial y un plano interno, así como numerosos enlaces hipertexto. Hay además una sección infantil así de colorida. Spotty, el perrito del propio Bush, ayuda al joven internauta a recorrer pasillos y habitaciones de la Casa Blanca. Creo que los gobiernos deben ser capaces de involucrar a toda la sociedad en la política, decía Bush a finales de agosto. En Washington hay mucho cinismo político. Me gustaría que la sociedad participara más de nuestras decisiones de gobierno. Internet como medio de comunicación entre gobiernos y sociedades, una posibilidad que se antoja especialmente necesaria en tiempos de crisis. Más información en nuestro sitio web.
Usted vive en la zona euro.
But as a Christian, I think often of another terrible day. A Friday of despair, darkness, and death. A Friday that left behind so much pain and hopelessness, and yet Sunday was coming, and Sunday did come. As we continue the work of rescue, recovery, rebuilding, reconstruction, we have to remember the spirit, the life, and the love that Father Mike left us, pulling us one to the other, giving us strength where it seems hard to imagine it could ever come again, and being resolute in our commitment to do everything we can to ensure that not one person who lost his or her life on our Tuesday of death and darkness will have died in vain. So thank you, Father Judge. Father, you gave us so many gifts when you were alive, gifts of laughter and love. And blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and you came to us. And now you've gone ahead, but you will never be forgotten, and we are grateful for the blessings of your life. Thank you.
That, of course, is Senator Hillary Clinton eulogizing Chaplain Michael Judge, making multiple references to her faith, her Christian roots, basically saying that Chaplain Michael Judge, who died administering last rites to a fireman, had not died in vain, and certainly that other Americans who lost their lives had not died in vain. Right now, it is time to check in with Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital. For those of you, before we get going with this, aren't familiar with the geography of New York, St. Vincent's was, in fact, one of the first hospitals that patients were first transported to after this horrendous tragedy. What are you finding there this morning, Doctor?
That's right, Paula. You know, it seems in some ways there's been a sense of normalcy returned to Greenwich Village here where St. Vincent's Hospital is located. And just behind me, you can see an ambulance that has just taken off and dropped off another patient here to St. Vincent's Hospital. We've had a chance to walk around, talk to a lot of people. Despite the normalcy, you look around and you still see missing persons walls, Paula. People gathering up, coming to the walls, seeing if they can find somebody that they may have known, a neighbor, a friend, a relative even. People have been walking around. The efforts, the volunteer efforts have just been remarkable. I mean, people say, as you've said many times earlier today, that they got more than enough perishable goods already. What we're hearing from the volunteer workers is save your perishable goods, give it in a week or a couple of weeks, because we're going to be needing it for a long time, so certainly that would be a better time to do it. Here at St. Vincent's Hospital, Paula, was one of the frontline hospitals. Of 552 patients or so have been treated here directly from this Tuesday tragedy. Only about 30 or so remain in the hospital today, so all the rest of those were either released right away or released subsequently since the tragedy. The doctors have been heroes. We certainly do have heroes behind those doors, and they have been taking outstanding care of the patients. Paula.
And I ask patience of the American people. There's no question in my mind we'll have the resolve. I witnessed it yesterday on the construction site. Behind the sadness and the exhaustion, there is a desire by the American people to not seek only revenge, but to win a war against barbaric behavior, people that hate freedom and hate what we stand for. And this is an administration that is going to dedicate ourselves to winning that war.
At that same meeting, Secretary of State Colin Powell disclosed that the country of Pakistan has agreed to all requests made of that country in recent days by the United States. Pakistan, of course, is a neighbor to Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden is reported to be in hiding with the protection of Afghanistan's militant Taliban government. The first sign of the depth and scope of the American response to Tuesday's attacks came last night when President Bush ordered up the reserves, 50,000 of them, to active duty. As well, the Congress voted overwhelmingly nearly, if not wholly unanimously, to approve a resolution authorizing President Bush to use all force that is necessary and appropriate to combat international terrorism. So, Tony, we will see if the nation that defeated Nazism and Soviet communism can do likewise with international terrorism. Tony?
James, there have been sort of mixed signals coming out of the White House and the administration about what sort of danger Americans now face. Has there been any further commentary or clarification on the part of the administration about whether it's safe out there or not, and what kind of vigilance Americans ought to be exercising right now?
Well, the president did address this in his remarks this morning, Tony. He asked that Americans go back to their business on Monday. He even noted that the professional sports will start to resume their schedules in time. But as he has said repeatedly over the past few days, we are not business as usual. This extends even to the White House, where the security perimeter has been extended over recent days. So the president trying to encourage people to go about their business, but not consider it business as usual.
Also, James, you mentioned that Pakistan now has agreed to all the requests that the United States has made. And it's worth noting that in recent years, relations have been strained for, among other reasons, Pakistan's support or at least tolerance of the Taliban regime in next-door Afghanistan. The question here is the administration now confident that Pakistan is going to be with us, or is it simply with us on paper?
No, the Secretary of State Colin Powell said today that not only has Pakistan agreed to all of the requests we've made for it, which include the ability to fly over their airspace, staging operations, other sort of things that will come in handy in a military operation against Pakistan's neighbor, but he said they were, quote, very forthcoming. He said we have gotten support around the world, and as he said, it's not just rhetorical support. Tony?
All right, James, thanks. Earlier in our broadcast, we were showing you part of a memorial service being conducted today for Barbara Olson, who's been on our air many times. Her husband, Ted, is Solicitor General of the United States. And a number of conservative legal luminaries have been speaking at Barbara's memorial mass here in the Washington area. Right now, Judge Robert Bork, who himself was nominated for the United States Supreme Court in 1987, is speaking to the crowd.
Yet these many accomplishments were merely the outward manifestations of an extraordinary spirit and soul. To those of us who knew Barbara Olson well, that inner essence was one of vitality, courage, loyalty to friends and principles, and a talent, or rather a genius, for friendship. But there was a deeper essence still. Barbara long ago converted to Catholicism. And while she was not, by the usual criteria, a practicing Catholic, she was by no means a lapsed Catholic. Her faith remained, and she knew that behind the surface of things lay a spiritual reality. That was an aspect of Barbara Olson that few people knew, but surely it contributed to her unfailing good cheer, her optimism, and it is good to think that that faith sustained her in the last minutes before her death. While we mourn Barbara Olson's death, we also rejoice that we had the great good fortune of knowing her in life. It was a good life, and it was an important life. Barbara will never grow old as we who are left behind grow old. She will always be at the height of her career and her powers and her marriage. Her life was shortened needlessly and wantonly, but we count ourselves blessed that we had her in our lives as long as we did.
That is Robert Bork at a memorial service, as we mentioned, for Barbara Olson, who died Tuesday. She was aboard an American Airlines jet that crashed into the Pentagon. At the Pentagon, the rescue efforts, or the search and recovery efforts, are continuing at a fairly brisk pace. As a matter of fact, overnight, rescuers and searchers, for the first time, were able to make significant headway. They've been able to shore up some of the structure, get in, remove a lot of the heavier debris, and the Pentagon actually is making available sometime today. We expect it really within a matter of minutes or even seconds. Some of the video of people coming in and pulling things out. The Pentagon was a structure built in great haste during World War II, and to the astonishment of many people involved originally in that project, it still stands. It was not meant to be quite as permanent or as strong as it is. Nevertheless, having sustained really what was a catastrophic strike, most of the Pentagon today is up and running. And as we've seen over the week, the Pentagon operations are continuing apace. As a matter of fact, as early as Wednesday, Pentagon officials, the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, the Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, and others were making a point of holding their briefings there. That was part of the psychological response to Tuesday's attacks, which is basically to say to the American people, look, we're not going to give in. We are not going to show that we are frightened by this. We're going to pick up, we're going to dust ourselves off, and we're going to move on. Nevertheless, for at least 125, 126 people here in Washington, or the families of 126 missing, this has been an excruciating ordeal. And standing by at the Pentagon is our Collins Spencer. Collins?
Hi, Tony. Well, we know a little more about the structural damage to the Pentagon after American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into it Tuesday morning. This morning during a news conference, Pentagon Renovation Program Manager showed a diagram of the extensive damage to the Pentagon.
Let me start with, first of all, what a declaration of war against terrorists really means for this country.
Well, in a legal sense, we haven't actually declared war, which if we did...
Avoid the United States and our allies. But we're not going to let them. They run to the hills. They find holes to get in. And we will do whatever it takes to smoke them out and get them running, and we'll get them.
And bin Laden believed to be hiding out in Afghanistan. Judy, one final other significant development. Neighboring Afghanistan, of course, is Pakistan. Secretary of State Colin Powell confirming today what CNN reported yesterday, that the Pakistanis have fully agreed to honor all requests from the U.S., which include the possibility of the U.S. using Pakistani airspace if the U.S. decides to wage any military attack. Judy?
All right, Kelly Wallace reporting from near Camp David. Bob Franken also joining us from the Pentagon, where there are two missions. One is to carry out any plans for war, as the president so bluntly put it today. Also to continue the recovery effort at the crash site. Bob?
Well, let's talk about the effort to carry out the plans first. And as we know, that's going to involve the use of reserve forces. Now, very quickly, the United States has about 1,300,000 reservists, about half of the total military force of the United States. Of that, just a small percentage has been authorized to be called up. 50,000 members of the reserves, that's the reserves of the various forces, and the National Guard. About 35,000 of those will be called up. As you can see, the Army is going to supply 10,000, the Air Force 13,000, the Marines 7,500, the Navy 3,000, and the Coast Guard, which normally operates under the Department of Transportation, will provide 2,000. As you might suspect, looking at the fact that the Coast Guard is involved, these are going to be used for what the Pentagon calls homeland defense, supporting the effort in the United States in this remarkable time to offer military protection to the domestic front right here. Now, as you pointed out, Judy, at the same time that the reserve call-up is being envisioned in this building, the plans are still being made. At the very same time, the efforts are being made to reconstruct this building, which, of course, was the target of a catastrophic air collision that happened on Tuesday. And we're finding out that this is quite a remarkable building, larger, for instance, than 3 Empire State Buildings, badly damaged. You can see that we have close-up shots of where the plane hit, and right next to where the plane hit, you can see that it was just this tangled mess inside, as you might imagine, and you can see that a large effort is being made to shove away all the debris and build a huge number of wood shoring supports so there would not be a further collapse. They're making quite a bit of progress, according to the people inside, but what they're encountering, they say, is something that is just almost remarkable to see.
This is on the first floor. This is very close to where the airplane went into. You can see the evidence of some of the different shoring that they're using in order to shore up the building. The way they described it to me is they come in, they remove some debris, they shore it up, they move in further, they move some debris, they shore it up. And it reminded me of being like in a coal mine filled with metal shards all over the place.
Now, that was Terry Mitchell, who was describing the video that the Pentagon provided. It was shot yesterday. Terry Mitchell of the Department of Defense. Now, what is so remarkable about all this is the fact that this occurred in a just renovated section of the Pentagon where new, very, very blast-resistant glass was installed. Many of the windows stayed. They were not shattered at all, which probably was life-saving. And they went on to describe a situation where, at the point where the plane actually penetrated the building, on the floors up from there, second, third, fourth, and fifth, people were able to get out. They were not injured. They were actually able to crawl out without injury. Remarkable renovation, which is being extended around the Pentagon. Now, of course, it's going to have to be expanded to repair what was already done. Judy?
And Bob, just to clarify, unlike New York, where they believe there may be pockets where people possibly, not likely, but possibly could be alive, and of course we all pray for that, at the Pentagon they don't see any pockets where a human being is likely to have survived.
They're not. They don't want to say so yet. They continue to insist they're not ready to give up, so they continue to look, but they will admit privately what they're really looking for are casualties. They have found several bodies today. They're not talking about the number yet, but of course we know that the latest estimate is for 189 casualties. That is to say, victims, people who were killed in this crash. You can look at what you're seeing here and just imagine that it might have been much worse. That's what they're saying here, but of course it was catastrophic, no matter how few were actually killed compared to what might have happened.
And just quickly, Bob, for the first few days, family members, loved ones of those missing were near the Pentagon trying to either get involved themselves or observing. Are there any people like that around now?
Well, every once in a while you find somebody, particularly at the site that has been set up for media, about a mile away. They will be there sometimes. There is a hotel nearby where people can gather to get support and to get information. But for the most part, there is very little to do but wait and expect the worst.
All right, Bob Franken reporting from the Pentagon, referring to that other mission at the headquarters for the United States military, that is to carry out any action of war. The United States House of Representatives last night passed a measure that authorizes President Bush to use force against those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. There was only one vote in the House against it. It was from California Representative Barbara Lee. CNN congressional correspondent Kate Snow joins us now from the Capitol with more on this lone dissenting voice. Kate.
Well, Judy, it was a late night for the House of Representatives. They were here until about 2 in the morning this morning. They did vote last night, and it's important to point out that almost everyone voted for this resolution to use force. They are trying to give the president some backing. They are saying that he can use force against those responsible specifically for the attacks on Tuesday. The Senate had voted early yesterday morning unanimously on the same measure. But as you mentioned, there was one lone voice of dissent in the House of Representatives, and that was California Democrat Barbara Lee.
Some of us must urge the use of restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause just for a minute and think through the implications of our actions today so that this does not spiral out of control.
Lee also had some concerns shared by many of her colleagues, and that is they didn't want to give too much leeway to the president. They didn't want him to be allowed to use force in the future without having to come back to this Congress to get permission, if you will. And they think that the language they have now in this resolution provides that kind of insurance that the president would have to come back here if he wanted to go after anyone other than those responsible for Tuesday's attacks. Now, despite Lee's objections, of course, this resolution passed overwhelmingly, 420 to 1. And again, it had already passed the Senate. It is the first action like this, Judy, since the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Judy.
And Kate, some very careful language in there, making it clear that under the War Powers Act, Congress still has the right to come back, to be specific, just to clarify that.
That's right, exactly.
All right, Kate Snow at the Capitol. And now back to Darren Kagan in Atlanta. Darren.
Judy, thank you. Want to go ahead and bring up to date folks who might just be joining us, or if they're following the story, bringing you the latest developments in the attack on America. President Bush today prepared Americans for a long and sustained war. He named for the first time publicly, saying that Osama bin Laden is what he called a prime suspect. Also today, Pakistan would be a key route to any U.S. attacks on terrorist camps inside Afghanistan. Pakistan today vowing to cooperate with the U.S. The ruling Taliban of Afghanistan promised to take action against anyone helping the U.S. attack its country. Law enforcement has made the first arrest in the terror case. Others are being detained at the same time. And on the economic front, Continental Airlines is laying off 12,000 workers. The shutdown this week taking a big toll on the airline industry. Let's take a closer look now on the global support that's coming for the U.S. military and has frankly been a groundswell of support in response to Tuesday's attacks. Some of it, in fact, coming from surprising quarters. Moscow moved closer to condoning military retaliation. Senior Russian officials say those who carried out the deadly operation should be punished, but punishment must be based on reliable facts. More now on Pakistan, which is signaling a growing willingness to work with the U.S. Pakistan, as we mentioned, pledging yesterday to fully cooperate, and its Cabinet and Security Council voting today to help the international community fight terrorism. At issue is neighboring Afghanistan, which has been known to shelter suspected terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden, which we heard President Bush name as the prime suspect in this case. Afghanistan has issued its own warning of retaliation if the U.S. launches military attacks within its borders. Of course, people on the ground in Afghanistan, we've heard, are very nervous about what might be to come. We have our own Nick Robertson on the ground there. He is in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick,
well, certainly, Darren, people here are concerned. We have heard stories of people leaving the town, some of them trying to get out to Pakistan, others trying to go and live with relatives in the countryside. Also hearing about food prices here going up as well, perhaps 10 to 15%. Now, as part of the scenario that's going on between Afghanistan and Pakistan right now, it's looking increasingly likely that the border between the two countries could close sometime in the future. And most of the food coming to Kabul and many other parts of Afghanistan comes from Pakistan. So that is another concern of the people here, not only the possibility of attack, but also the possibility that their food resources could start drying up. So there's been some not panic buying, but certainly people trying to buy up sufficient stocks to see them through for a while. But the Taliban earlier today were really keen to try and head off the Pakistani government from deciding to assist the United States in any attack on Afghanistan. And their statement was designed specifically towards Pakistan, telling them that if the United States was to use Pakistan's airspace or soil, then they would consider that an attack by Pakistan on Afghanistan. And they warned very much that they might use an army, their own Mujahideen fighting army, they say, to move into Pakistan. This is how a Taliban spokesman laid it out.
If neighboring or regional countries, particularly Islamic countries, gave a positive response to American demand for military bases, it would spark up extraordinary danger. Similarly, if any neighboring country gave territorial way or airspace to USA against our land, it would draw us into an imposed war.
Darren, also tribal elders around the country today meeting, advising the Taliban not to close down diplomatic channels, but also saying to them, if they are attacked, all the tribes in Afghanistan would support the Taliban. Darren?
That's our Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, thank you very much. Of course, people in Afghanistan aren't the only ones wondering about what might come next in terms of a military response from the United States, people across the U.S. and around the world as well. With more on that, let's check in with our Miles O'Brien, who's looking at different options. Miles.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm here with General Wesley Clark, and we're just spending a little bit of time orienting ourselves on some maps we've found of Afghanistan and the surrounding regions. General Clark is our military analyst, of course, former Supreme Commander of NATO. General, first of all, before we get started into the details of what we're talking about here, I think there is an impression out there among people who've heard the debates over Pentagon spending and the need to spend more, that the Pentagon and the military forces may not be at a state of readiness for something which is contemplated right now. What's your sense of it?
I think we're very, very ready. The debate about the Pentagon spending is about the future of the armed forces. We're talking about now. And we've paid a lot of attention over the years to being ready now. Could we have been more ready? Could we have had more people and more equipment, sure, but we're in good shape.
Of course, a lot of what they're talking about is that ability to fight a two-theater type conflict, which is does not necessarily apply in this case.
That's right.
Generally speaking, as military planners think about some sort of response to this, are they thinking about big numbers, or is it more of a special forces type of approach?
Well, it's small numbers initially because we're only dealing with a network of people. We'd like to go after the specific individuals who are involved. Now, it may turn into something else, and so our planners are going to be thinking several steps down the road. If we do one thing and he does something else and then we come back again. And so we've got to be thinking about this in depth in time and depth in geography. And it's what Colin Powell said, multidimensional.
All right, now let's see if we can get this map to cooperate with us a little bit. It's a little bit...
Well, we're looking at the northern part of Afghanistan here.
All right, so the northern part, let's scroll it down just a little bit if we can. This touch screen has to cooperate a little bit. Oh, wait a minute, hang on 1 second, and bear with us here. While we're doing this, why don't I ask you this? Overall, how much... this is not exactly a stable region, just to help people understand exactly where we are.
This is a really
unstable,
lots of refugees,
right.
Tribal. It's been racked by conflict for 20 years. It's been infiltrated with various, not only tribes that move across, back and forth through these provinces and across the border, but also religious sects.
So you've got this unstable region. You've got a porous border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. As a military planner, do you have to kind of look at the region as a whole then, don't you?
You do. You have to take a big picture view of this. Now, what we would like to do, of course, is to the precise point, but you can't.
All right. This is Kabul right here, by the way, just to give you a sense of it. This is a very mountainous region, and as we consider the possibility of this scenario, you have to harken back to 1979, the Soviet invasion to Afghanistan.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about that, some of the pitfalls that were involved there. A lot of people have called that the Soviet Vietnam. What was the issue there as we look at some of these pictures?
They came in to establish a government that was more favorable to them. They put the government in power, and they reinforced it with significant military forces, conventional military forces, moved in from the north out of Soviet Asia, and moved down through avenues of approach here, occupied Kabul, and discovered, and I don't remember the exact avenues of approach, but they're going into this direction, and occupied Kabul and discovered then that controlling the capital is not the same as controlling the country. They fell into the plight
Miles, I'm sorry.
invaders.
My apologies to you and to the General. I want to just jump in here a second. We have some breaking news taking place in Midtown Manhattan. This is near the Javits Center, where thousands of people have shown up to volunteer only to be turned away. Our Bill Hemmer is on the scene there. Bill, what do you have?
Yeah, Darren, thank you, and hello to you also. Police commissioner about, I'd say 90 minutes ago, made the word official, and it just spread to the area here where thousands had hoped to gather so their services could be used to volunteer. The police department came by just about 5 minutes ago and made the announcement. This is how that went down a short time ago.
But due to the overabundance of iron workers and everybody, there's no further need today for your type of skills. We thank you, but you have to go home. Just be advised, please keep advised of the TV and see what they need. But right now, there's no further need for any type of volunteer construction workers.
And clearly a wave of disappointment quickly swept over this crowd. Again, thousands of people had converged on here. They're leaving in droves at this point. A number of people said they're just going to start walking downtown and see what they can do eventually when they get there. Jason Harrison, is it, Jason? A firefighter who came in from the state of Michigan near Fleet and Hadley Township. You were in the construction site in the rubble last night. You're not going to get a chance today. How do you feel?
I don't know. It's kind of sickened. I mean, it's horrible down there, you know. A lot of you know, dead bodies. The smell is really bad.
Why'd you come here, Jason?
Just to try to help. I didn't want to stay at home and just sit on my hands, you know, and say, well, I wish there was something I could do. You know, I thought I'd just, you know, get up and go help.
What about tomorrow? Do you hold out hope that you might be able to contribute then?
I'm not sure. I got to go back to work on Monday.
And that's Bill Hemmer reporting there. We're just going to take this opportunity to break away from our sister station and network, CNN USA, for just a few minutes to bring you up to date on how the rest of the world is responding to this week's terrorist attacks on the United States. I'm Rosemary Church at the CNN Center. Well, the attack on the World Trade Center struck at the center of U.S. financial markets. U.S. stock markets have been closed since Tuesday. The New York stock market is slated to reopen.
Picking through the little pieces of the debris, searching for evidence.
This is the largest building in the world, and it was built, I believe, in 1941, and the Department of War was in the old executive office building, and they needed to make room for it, and so they built it in 1941, largest building in the world. So you really, sometimes when you see it on television, don't get a feeling for the size of this place.
6 million square feet of office space. They say 4 million of that office space is operable. The other 2 million has been damaged. They are also saying that that office space, just to give people a sense, what does that mean? It's 3 times the amount in the Empire State Building.
Strangely enough, September 11th, 1941, September 11th, 1941, construction was begun on the Pentagon. And on September 11th, the attack in 2001. It's an eerie sight because I think the reaction to so many people who saw this attack on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, what you heard from many people was, how could this have happened